In the trial of Dr. Marshall Benton Taylor, there were 23 witnesses that were called for the Commonwealth, and only 5 of them were cross-examined by the defense. Of these witnesses, only 1 had to be redirected by the prosecution. By comparison, there were also 15 witnesses called by the defense, and only 2 of them were cross-examined by the prosecution with no redirection. In addition, the prosecution called 8 witnesses in rebuttal of the defense, and 2 of them were cross-examined by the defense with no redirection made by the prosecution. Of these 46 witnesses, most gave testimony that seemed to factually help the defense, or had no real bearing on the trial. After studying the transcript, reading and rereading it over and over, it is no wonder that the often told story states that Dr. Taylor was found guilty on circumstantial evidence and the actions involving his rifle taken by 3 jurors. Charles Johnson tells us in his book, A Narrative History of Wise County, Virginia, that, quote, at the time of the Taylor trial, shorthand reporting had not come into popularity and efficiency. So in making the transcript of evidence to be used in an appeal to the State Supreme Court of Appeals, the lawyer would write out an evidence of each witness in narrative style rather than present-day question and answer style. If the lawyers could not agree on the testimony, the judge would write the transcript of the disputed evidence, unquote. What this means is that no questions were recorded in the transcript except the disputed testimony, and in that case, the judge would record the question and answer. This happened only twice in the Taylor trial, as there were only 2 questions recorded in the transcript. One of these occurs in the testimony of Jane Mullins. The question was about how she was able to identify Dr. Taylor during the massacre. Likewise, it is only the testimony of Jane that had to be redirected by the prosecution. This was because Jane Mullins, star witness for the prosecution, was hammered over and over by the defense over statements that she had made shortly after the massacre. In a modern court case, it is the defense attorneys who prepare the brief on which the appeals is made. However, Mr. Johnson's further explanation of the transcript informs us that at the time of the Taylor trial, it was the job of the judge and the county clerk to prepare all appeals. Jane Mullins had disappeared for nearly 4 hours after the massacre, and had given contradictory statements about where she was and what she had done during that time. The testimony about the disappearance is just one of the oddities in the transcripts that makes us believe that the transcript was presented to the Court of Appeals was in fact edited. The record shows that Jane had answered a question about when she had arrived back in the Camden section of President Jenkins, but it appears that there were no follow-up questions to ascertain why it took her over 3 hours to travel 6 miles on horseback. Nor is there any indication that shortly after the massacre there was a search instigated for Jane and her horse. The search for Jane and her horse officially ended at around 6 p.m. when Jane, her horse, and family members arrived on the mountain to retrieve the bodies of the slain, and the questioning of Jane Mullins and her story began. But this is not the only odd occurrence in the testimony of Jane Mullins, which will be further discussed as they occur in the transcript. Again, we want to remind our readers and listeners at the time of the trial there were no questions recorded in the transcript unless the testimony of the witness was in dispute. This happens once in the testimony of Jane Mullins. This means for all the testimony, we and the Court of Appeals are left to our own devices to figure out what the witness was asked that elicited the testimony. A semicolon between the answers is the only clue we are given that the answer to the question had ended and a new question had been asked. However, as we will see, this process was not always followed. Some of the answers appeared to be in response to a multifaceted question or a consolidation of the answers to the multiple questions. In either case, the transcript is easier to follow the more that you are aware of the events leading up to the trial. A luxury that you and we have looked back on the event through hindsight, but one that the Court of Appeals could not and did not have. For ease of understanding, some words were added by us to the transcript. These words appear in italic. We have also separated and marked the sections that appear to be answers to the multifaceted questions or consolidation of the multiple questions and answers with the notation of next question and end of question in parentheses. Other than that, this testimony and transcript are presented word for word as they appear in the narrative history of Wise County, Virginia by Charles A. Johnson. The testimony of Mrs. Jane Mullins, witness for the Commonwealth. The witness testified that she lived in Kentucky, was the widow of Wilson Mullins. Next question. Answer. That she was along when Ira Mullins and the other persons were killed. Next question. Answer. They had got about a half a mile from Pound Gap when the shooting commenced. From the right side of the road and above the road, her husband started to run. End of question. Next question. Answer. He got about 10 or 15 steps when she saw him fall, and she saw one of the horses fall, and went around to it and saw it was shot. She ran to her husband and found that he was shot. End of question. Next question. Answer. She turned him on his side and looked towards where the shooting came from, and then started back to the wagon to see if others were killed. She saw 3 men standing some 20 or 25 steps from the wagon. Mrs. Ira Mullins had got out of the wagon and was under it, and hollered to her to come to her. Witness hollered, quote, "Boys, for the Lord's sake, don't shoot any more. You have killed them all now." Unquote. They replied, quote, "GDU, take to the road and leave or we will kill you." Unquote. She took it to be Dr. Taylor, Heenan, and Calvin Fleming. End of question. Next question. Answer. She recognized them by seeing them. End of question. Next question. Answer. They had green veils over their faces. She recognized Cal Fleming's voice and also thought that she recognized Dr. Taylor's voice. The veils were over their heads and faces. She could see the lower part of their faces. She thought she recognized Martin Benton Taylor. End of question. This is the end of the first round of questioning of Jane Mullins by the young Commonwealth attorney Robert Bruce. As you can see, this transcript, which was on file at the appellate court, would be more informative to us and the appellate judges if some of the questions had been recorded, especially in the questioning of the Commonwealth's, quote, star witness, unquote, Jane Mullins. Cross-examination by Dr. Taylor's defense team. Next question. Answer. On cross-examination, the witness testified that she was riding behind the wagon and that the Mullins and Harris boys were by her side. Wilson Mullins was by the side of the wagon when the shooting commenced. The shooting came from the right-hand side of the road. The parties who did the shooting were behind the rocks or the cliffs. End of question. Next question. Answer. She could see them from the breast up. End of question. Next question. Answer. They spoke 3 or 4 times. She took it to be Cal Fleming who spoke first. End of question. Next question. Answer. She thought 2 voices spoke to her. She got back to Elkhorn about 4 p.m. End of question. Here is the first oddity in the questioning of Jane Mullins. She is clearly asked about her late arrival to the Camden section of present-day Jenkins, Kentucky. However, there are no follow-up questions to ascertain why it took her over 3 hours to ride 6 miles on her return home, a trip that should have taken 15 minutes on a galloping horse. Yet she had not been seen by anyone traveling that day on either side of Pound Mountain. She had not been seen by anyone until she arrived in Camden. In addition, This means that she passed John Bentley's store, Richard Burroughs' survey camp at Sweetwater, John Wright's home, and others without stopping to seek help. This is an important bit of information, as we shall see. The importance lies in the fact that no other questions by the defense are recorded in the transcript about her late arrival. Still, in the re-examination or redirects by the prosecution, a question is asked about her horse. However, no questions about the horse appears in the transcript of the questioning by the defense. Next question. Answer. She was excited about the shooting that was going on. She had known Dr. Taylor for 15 years. She had heard him talk and had stayed overnight with him about 7 or 8 years before. End of question. It is at this point that the defense starts pounding Jane about the contradictory statements she had made prior to being taken into custody as the star witness. Of note here, Jane states that she had stayed overnight with Dr. Taylor. This, more than likely, had to do with the birth of Jane and Wilson's daughter. However, this testimony may have been one of the instances that caused the identity of Jane to become mixed with two other women. Jane Mullins, who Dr. Taylor had an affair and child with, her sister Amanda Mullins, and Amoda Jane Mullins, the wife of Wilson, sister of Ira, and surviving witness of the Killing Rock. For more information on this, see our video titled, Who is Jane Mullins? Back to the testimony of Jane Mullins. Question. Answer. She did not state at the inquest that she did not know who it was. End of question. Next question. Answer. She did not tell Mrs. Blevins on the day after the killing that she did not know who it was. She did not tell Mr. Bentley that she did not know who it was. End of question. Note here, Mr. Bentley was John Bentley, the magistrate who had conducted the inquest. Next question. Answer. She did not tell Matt Blevins that she did not know who it was. She did not tell the grand jury that they had veils over their faces. She said that she saw part of their faces. Witness said that she had heard Dr. Taylor talk last fall. If she told Mrs. Blevins that she did not know them, she was talking and not swearing. She said that she told several people that she did not know who it was. End of question. Of note here are the veils in question. Jane had told several witnesses that she was only able to see the attackers from the waist to the mouth. From the mouth up, they were wearing dark veils, held in place by a green band of some sort at their foreheads. But she had told the prosecutor that the veils were green. It is by the end of this question or questions that Jane appears to have become rattled by the defense, as we soon shall observe. Next question. Answer. She said that she did not swear before John V. Bentley that she did not know who it was, because he told her that she need not answer that question. She said that she was not point-blank certain that it was Dr. Taylor, but that she thought it was. She thought she could swear positively to a person with their face covered down to the mouth. She said that she did not tell Mrs. Blevins last winter that, quote, "Yonder goes that old devil now, and I would like to see him in the middle of a kettle of torment," unquote. End of question. Here is yet another oddity in the transcript. Even though the testimony alludes to the fact that Magistrate John Bentley and Robert Mullins conducted the investigation at the crime scene, neither the transcript nor the story being told by Charles Johnson confirms that fact. It is in the often told story that we learn that this vital information and the fact that John V. Bentley conducted the inquest. Inquests were conducted to gather as much information about a crime as possible. It is often during the inquest that suspects are named. Yet here Jane testifies that John Bentley told her not to tell him who she thought had committed the crime. This is a statement that contradicts her earlier testimony and makes no sense. Additionally, we learn from the often told story that Henry Adams, and James Potter were named as suspects by the inquest due to the circumstantial evidence found at the crime scene. This is corroborated by the fact that Henry Adams turned himself in and was out on bail by the time of the shootout at the breaks of the Cumberland. The inquest was conducted on or about May 19th, and Jane Mullins would have been taken into protective custody on or about May 26th. But Dr. Taylor and the Fleming brothers were not named as suspects until Jane testified before the grand jury on June the 2nd. In either case, it was with the answer that, quote, she said she did not swear before John V. Bentley that she did not know who it was because he told her that she need not answer that question, unquote. That Jane Mullins, star witness for the prosecution, contradicted her earlier testimony and perjured herself. Therefore, the jury more or less threw out the testimony, and it is recorded in the affidavits that the jury only found Dr. Taylor guilty through the evidence found at the crime scene, the bullet shells, and their examination and alteration of Dr. Taylor's rifle back to the transcript and the testimony of Jane Mullins. Next question. Answer. She told Calvin and Wesley Swindle that she did not know who it was. She just told them what she wanted to tell them. End of question. Next question. Answer. She was afraid to tell who it was for the fear that they would kill her. She recognized Dr. Taylor mostly by his looks and saw him from the breast up. End of question. Next question. Answer. The recognition of Dr. Taylor was mostly by his looks. End of the defense questions. Re-examination or redirect by Commonwealth Attorney Robert Bruce. Next question. Answer. On re-examination, witness said Bentley, Jarvie Candell, and others told her not to tell who it was. Witness heard that Taylor and the Fleming boys were laying around her house trying to kill her. End of question. Next question. Answer. That she got this information from James Potter. When the firing commenced, her horse threw her and she got off some way. She did not know how. End of question. Here we see the prosecution attempts to save Jane Mullins as a witness. We also see in one of the questions he attempted to recover her testimony about the horse, a line of questioning that makes no sense as the transcript does not record the defense asking a question that would have required this redirect. But there is even a bigger problem here. Jane Mullins answers an unknown question stating that Dr. Taylor and the Flemings were lying in an ambush around her home and that James Potter had told her this. Although Jane could not know this, the prosecution knew that Sarah Blevins would later testify that Jane had told her after the funerals that James Potter, a man whose name repeatedly comes up throughout the story, James Potter told her that Dr. Taylor and the Flemings were the ones who had ambushed her family at the Killing Rock. It is after this devastating testimony and the equally devastating redirect about the horse that the prosecution knew that Jane was now useless as a witness. This is further reflected when the defense once again questions Jane Mullins. Next question. Answer. On the recross-examination, witness further stated that she told what suited her and when it suited her. The witness further stated that she had been brought over here by the officers of the county and that she had been here ever since, in the care of the officers of this county. End of question. End of Jane Mullins' testimony. This concludes the testimony of Jane Mullins. As you can see, not only did Jane perjure herself with a testimony about J.V. Bentley and the inquest, but by this time Jane had become extremely agitated and upset, telling the defense, the court, and the jury that she was in fact a liar. She did this by contradicting her entire testimony by stating that she, quote, told what suited her and when it suited her, unquote. The final note in the testimony of Jane Mullins is a disputed part of Jane's testimony. We know this because it has a recorded question. This means that the question was clarified by the judge with a question of his own. This occurred during the cross-examination by the defense, the transcript reads. The witness was asked how she could recognize Dr. Taylor. She answered that she could see him from the waist up to the place where the veil came. She also said that, at the time they were talking to her, a slight stopping of the firing when the smoke rose so that she could see them. One last note on the question asked by the judge. The only question recorded in the transcripts were those that were asked by the judge. These were supposed to clarify a disputed testimony. But in this case, the question is nearly pointless and clarifies nothing, as the answer is almost verbatim to the rest of the testimony about the veils. This is the only other instance in which someone who is not familiar with the case can garner no information about the importance of this testimony, which includes the appellate court. However, looking back on the case through history and hindsight, we can clarify the testimony. Jane had been asked a question by the defense about the identity of the attackers, and a statement that she had originally made to the May 26 grand jury that had issued the first indictment dated June 3, 1892. That indictment had been quashed and thrown out by the deposition on July 26th. Robert Bruce had then handwritten a new indictment and had Jane Mullins sign it as, quote, witness, unquote. The new grand jury, who had been seated on July 26th, had not heard any testimony before the signing off on the second indictment. The information about the veils is vital to know in this case, but the new grand jury and the appellate court would not have known what we are about to tell you. Jane Mullins had told several people that the men had worn dark veils that came down to their mouths and were held in place by a green band at the forehead. The prosecution had apparently been aware of this and asked a question about it, to which Jane testified, quote, the veils were over their heads and faces, and that, quote, she could see the lower part of their faces, unquote. However, the defense had apparently asked Jane about what she had told to the grand jury on June 3rd about those veils, to which she testified that, quote, she did not tell the grand jury that they had veils over their faces, unquote, and that she had told the grand jury that, quote, she saw part of the faces, unquote. This line of questioning and her answer seems to have rattled Jane. It is as if that she was not aware that the defense would have access to what she had told the grand jury. Looking at this, the testimony that she said that she had made to the grand jury contradicted the testimony that she had just made to the prosecution. This meant that either she had lied to the grand jury or that she had just lied on the stand to the question asked by the prosecutor, Robert Bruce. We know this because the judge asked a clarifying question and the defense kept coming back to this line of questioning, as Jane further testifies that, quote, she said she was not point-blank certain that it was Dr. Taylor, but she thought it was. She thought that she could swear positively to the person with the face covered down to the mouth, unquote. And two other times in the testimony she states, quote, she recognized Dr. Taylor mostly by his looks and saw him from the breast up, unquote, and, quote, the recognition was mostly by his looks, unquote. Think about this for a minute. How likely are you to identify someone during a shootout who is trying to kill you when you can only see that person from the waist to the chin area? She had already testified that she was, quote, highly excited, unquote, or more to the point, frightened and fearing for her life. And yet Jane had managed to not only identify one shooter dressed in this fashion, which is highly unlikely, but three shooters in a similar garb in a matter of moments. Jane Mullins had perjured herself at least 3 times. More than any person is why her testimony of Jane Mullins is highly unreliable. We at Kentucky, Tennessee Living want to thank you for watching our series, The Killing Rock. Don't forget to hit that like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell for notifications. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky, Tennessee Living as we bring to you the history of the Appalachian Mountains. We remind everyone that the story names Killing Rock, The Oft-Told Tales, Killing Rock, The Untold Story, and Killing Rock, The Trial are all under the Kentucky-Tennessee Living copyright.